Thank you very much for inviting me here, and I'm talking about the disappearing divide. All of you have got cell phones which you are inseparable from. Well, this is looking at where it's going, particularly in terms of research. So I'm going to be talking about actual experiments. If you were looking forward to a load of mathematical equations this morning, I'm sorry, I'll disappoint you. There is, of course, maths behind it all, but I'm going to talk about the experiments here, and I will get straight into it. So these are practical experiments that I am involved with or have been involved with, and so this is all science, if you like. It's happened or is happening. First thing, now it's referred to as biohacking. This is the modern terminology. Lots of different people, perhaps more people from the arts world are trying this sort of thing. And often, Cyril, you were talking about putting things in your ends of your fingers. We're going to be looking at putting things in the end of your fingers. Maybe not yet eyes, but perhaps, next week we'll see. This, I'm afraid, this is a younger version of me. This is me a few years ago in the doctor. This is just my GP, my regular doctor. And what he's doing is putting a little implant into my arm. This was the first implant I experimented with. This is what the implant looked like. Not the thing on the left-hand side. This is this quaint old currency that we have in the UK. On the right-hand side is a radio frequency identification device, RFID, and this was implanted in my left arm. So how it worked, this was linked to the computer in my building at Reading. So as I walked down the corridor, the computer knew it was me, so the lights came on for me. And I went towards the laboratory and the door opened. And I came through the front door and it said, "Hello, Professor Warwick." So all because of my implant. And it was just trying to show what is possible with a piece of technology. You can do the same thing with a smart card, sure, but that wasn't the point. The point was a computer picking up from signals inside your body. In this case, it was just an RFID, and then doing things for you. In this case, it was all positive things, that the lights came on. It could have been that doors shut and didn't. If you were a prisoner with this thing, then maybe your doors don't open. But all sorts of possibilities. And various people complained, what do you want to do that for? I think one of the key uses of these now is perhaps not so much with humans, but with animals. Does anybody have a cat or a dog with a chip implanted in them? There's one yes. Yeah, thank you very much. So somebody, it's a few people. It's called a pet passport. Well, you can feel happy that the technology was fully tested on humans before your animal received this implant. So that's one of the main uses. In the US, part of the problem with the Obamacare plan is that now people with diabetes and epilepsy, a lot of them have the same, a smaller thing, but a little chip implanted in them, so that if they get taken off to hospital for urgent care, the hospital authorities know what medication to give them. But because they have an implant, then it's easy to regulate them and say what sort of implant you've got to have, and to have a lot of information on them. So all sorts of uses of this at the moment, apart from various artists and people trying it out to see what's possible and what's not. Now I promise you things in your fingers, and this is what some of my students are doing. So we get ethical approval. I have various students who like to play around with implants and so on, and what we're doing with it is sensory substitution. You'll see what I mean in a second. So again, these are actual experiments going on. The first student that had one was Jawesh. This is his finger, but I now have 3 students that have the same implant. You can see the procedure there. And also you might notice the guy that's putting the implant in place has tattoos on his arm. You might spot the tattoos there. That's because his main job is a tattoo artist. That's what he does. But he puts these implants in as well. Now, this creates a bit of a problem because you can see this on the web. He goes by the name. His trade name is Dr. Evil. That's what he calls himself. And unfortunately, we have to get ethical approval from the university. And on the forms for ethical approval, it said who is carrying out the medical procedure. And we have to write Dr. Evil, which makes things very difficult as far as the committees are concerned. But what he's got implanted, this is an X-ray of his hand. You can see the 2 permanent magnets. So in 2 fingers, he's got permanent magnets actually in his fingers. So I've got 3 students now that have exactly this. And you see here what he's doing. On the baseball cap are ultrasonic sensors. For those of you into robotics, you probably use ultrasonic sensors a lot. They give a good indication of distance, which humans don't have. You know, it's one of the senses. We don't have an ultrasonic sense normally. We don't really have a good sense of distance to objects. But what we're doing here, the ultrasonic sensors, the output is connected down to a little coil of wire this is around his finger, with the magnet is in the finger. So as an object comes closer, it changes the current in the coil, and that vibrates the magnet. Essentially, the closer the object, the more the magnet vibrates, and the further away the object, so the magnet vibrates less. So the student can feel how much, how far away objects are from the magnet vibrating. Closer the object, the more the vibration, the further away, the less it vibrates. Now, clearly for somebody who is blind, this would give them an indication where there are objects. They could walk around, there's something there. They would feel that there are objects there. For other people, of course, it's like a different sense. It's a sensory substitution. It's substituting distance, ultrasonics, into a sense of touch, an inside sense of touch. One of my students now, rather than using ultrasonics, he's using infrared. So infrared is like a heat signal from a distance. So he, rather than having an eye in his finger, he can detect heat from a distance. So he can scan around and say, you are hotter than you are hotter. So you find the temperatures just in a temperature sense, not in any sexual sense or anything like that. So he can detect the heat from a distance, which of course humans can't do. We can detect heat if we touch it, but if I was asked who is the hottest, who has the hottest body in this room, I have no idea. I don't. But the student would be, and he would home in and would know exactly who the person was after a while, of course. So detecting heat from a distance is sensory substitution, but giving us a sense that we don't have. We can't do that normally. Now, for something different, communication, as you see, I think communication for humans is very poor. The way we communicate, given how our brains operate, is very poor. It's pretty pathetic how we communicate, really. So looking at other ways of communicating is quite interesting. This is a student, Ashley, a project based on some work by a guy called Paul Bacchi-Rita. And essentially it's a small array of electrodes that you put on your tongue, and it sends patterns of signals into your tongue with small electrical pulses. So you can send shapes and patterns and letters, directions. You can direct somebody to move left or right very accurately. So it's a different way of communicating with the brain. It's sending signals into the brain, not through the ears or eyes, but in this case through the tongue. The tongue is extremely sensitive, and it is a very fast and quite an accurate route into the brain. And at the moment, various technological companies are looking at things like this, because a lot of, for driving a car, for example, it's mostly visual. And we're really loading up more and more visual information, but we can feed information into the brain in other ways, potentially via the tongue. And this is something, if you haven't tried it before, put this on your tongue. Very quickly you can use it. You can accurately say, yes, that's a triangle, that's a circle. Very quickly you get to be able to use this quite accurately. And it is, for as short, if you're looking for a quick reaction time, this is a very, very fast and accurate route into the brain if you want to communicate with the brain. It's interesting, Cyril, you were talking about children and how children look at things, and anybody that's had some children would know when they're very young, they tend to put a lot of things into their mouth to learn about things. Everything seems to go into their mouth. Why is that? Why do children? Well, the tongue is extremely sensitive. I'm not saying that is the reason, but one of the reasons, I think they can sense texture and feelings. They learn about things by putting them on the tongue, partly because it is a rapid route into the brain. Maybe, we then stop using it as we get older, because adults don't do things like that until a man and a woman kissing each other and so on. But apart from that, we don't tend to use the tongue to communicate that much. Maybe we could. Just one possibility. Now, for those of you that have thought about what a robot is, perhaps you feel a robot is something that either a human controls with a joystick or a computer controls it. Well, what I'm going to talk about now is robots that can have a brain of their own, just like us, a biological brain, which gives you a whole different meaning in terms of what the robots mean. First of all, though, I've got a clip. This is from a BBC programme called Inventions That Change the World, and we're going to see some of the robots that I get to play with. The first one is called Morgui. I don't know, do we have any Chinese people here? Or if anybody from China? No, what a shame. Well, Morgui, no, so I can, as we all know, Morgui is Mandarin Chinese for magic ghost. It's like a scary robot. So the first robot you're going to see is like a robot head which has 5 senses, and we're trying to fuse the data from the senses into the robot's brain, if you like. For this presentation, the little robots that we'll see later on are more important. So here goes.
One of the AI community's leading lights is Professor Kevin Warwick.
Well, this is a robot head.
Dissatisfied with vacuum cleaners and robot dogs, Kevin's gone one stage further. His cyborg comes complete with
radar in its nose and an infrared top lip.
Is it intelligent?
Well, in a very limited way, I guess it is. It's sort of a basic instinct. What do I do with this information that I'm getting? How do I move? How do I operate if this signal is different?
So what's it doing now?
Well, if you clap your hands...
Oi, over here. Oh, it did it.
It's making basic decisions. All we've got it doing here is programmed to make basic decisions based on that sensory information that's coming in.
Getting the information in is nothing. That's like picking up a book. That's not an intelligent thing to do. Reading the book and knowing what the words mean, that's surely the intelligence.
Many machines can read books nowadays, but it means something different electronically to the machine as it would mean to a human.
Though the cyborg head does a reasonable job of sensing, it can't really interact with or explore its surroundings. It's fastened to its robot arm. And according to Kevin, it's only as intelligent as a dishwasher. If that's a dishwasher...
Yes.
Where are these in terms of... Are they dolphins, chimps?
I think you'd have to say it's about the 50 to 100 brain cell area. So realistically, you're talking slugs and snails.
But a slug and a snail, they know to eat. They know. These things don't...
They have some innate abilities.
There's no self-preservation with that.
Well, we do have. The power supply, they don't have their own batteries. They each have power they're picking up from the floor here. That's where they're getting their energy. That's where they're getting their food
But
from.
if you turned off this section of the floor...
If we turn off this section,
was here,
they have a basic instinct to go and look for some power somewhere else.
They
will keep going to do that until they find some.
So if I put him down...
It should go off looking.
So he'll have to go and look for power. And I got to tell him to do that.
No, it's an innate response for that robot. It's a basic thing of its life. Yeah.
No, his lights have come back on.
Lights are coming on.
So he's found power.
He's happy now that he's getting power. Away to go.
But these then are as intelligent as slugs.
It's different. But in terms of numbers of brain cells and that sort of thing, yeah, we have slugs. Probably you could say we're up to bees and wasps, the sort of tens of thousands of brain cells, is about as good as you can get. Yeah.
Bees and wasps.
Yeah.
Right.
So those little robots you were looking at there have computers, microprocessors that control them. But what we've done is replace the computers with biological brains. So I'll show you a diagram first and then we'll see some of the little robots in action. So if you look on the right hand side, that's the technological body, the little wheels, ultrasonic sensors, the robots we saw moving around. So that's the physical side, the body of the robot, which could be anything. It could be a walking robot, it doesn't really matter. The brain, though, we've replaced by a biological. It says neural network. This is not a computer artificial neural network. This is a biological neural network. And it says here MEA, which is multi-electrode array. What this is a little dish which we're going to see with electrodes on the bottom of the dish, and then brain cells, neurons, are put in the dish. Typically, we get the brain cells from rat embryos and separate them using enzymes and then put them in the dish and grow them. So the dish with the brain cells has to be kept in an incubator at 37 degrees centigrade. It's a living thing. The brain cells send out tentacles very, very quickly, which link up with each other, which becomes the axons and dendrites and so on. So, and after about 10 days, we have a two-dimensional complex network, high connectivity. Typically, the brain will have more than 100,000 neurons in it, not more than about 150,000. So about 125,000 is a typical size of this sort of brain. And what I'm going to show you in a second is the brain in action. Because we can look at how the brain develops. We've got access to it under the microscope and so on. This is the multi-electrode array, and the brain grows in here. These rings, called Potter rings, to stop it dehydrating. We have to keep the brain pretty moist. But after about 10 days, we can send signals, electrical signals, into the brain to stimulate it. These are like sensory input to the brain. And then we can see where the brain will respond. It will think, bing, 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 pathways through the brain, and we'll get a response somewhere, some of the time, and we will send signals from that to, as you'll see, to change the direction of the robot. So we have a feedback loop. The sensor, the ultrasonic sensor, as the robot moves around, will detect objects such as a wall, and what we want the robot to do is to change direction so it doesn't hit the wall. But we want it to decide to do that via its biological brain. So what you're going to see is a robot, and the only decision to change direction is carried out by the biological brain. There's no computer in there and there's no human in there saying this is what I want you to do. It's purely decisions by the biological brain. So here we go. So here's our little robot. You can see the physical side of the robot. The brain itself is remote. It's a wireless connection. This is one big advantage. You're talking about your body. Well, your brain and your body can be in separate places, as we see here. So that's what we want it to do. But any change of direction is the biological brain, and this is what we don't want it to do, is to crash into the wall. But the brain is only 10 days old. It's a baby brain as far as robots are concerned. It's just starting out on life, and it has to learn, essentially, and how it learns is part of the research that we're looking at. So there it got it right, it turned, and there it didn't get it right, so it didn't turn. So we can look at the development of the brain over time, and we can witness Hebbian learning. Those of you that studied Hebbian learning, the basics of neural plasticity and processing, if one brain cell operates and it causes another brain cell to operate, the pathway between the two will strengthen. And we can look at that happening here. We have a pathway through the brain which causes it to change direction. Every time it does that, the pathways strengthen. So it becomes more likely to do it again. It's the same with humans. When you do something, and you do something, and you do something, you become more and more, it's easier to do it, it almost becomes automatic, because the pathways through the brain is physical things in the brain. The connections between the brain cells get bigger and bigger and bigger, becomes more likely to do that. And we can look at the development, we can change it, we can put different chemicals to make it happen better, or to inhibit the growth in certain areas. We can stop it if we don't like it doing something. We can apply chemicals that make it less likely to do that. So you've seen how this brain is after 10 days. Some of the time it gets it right. There it got stuck in the corner again. Some of the time it gets it wrong. Now we're going to look at the same brain, the same robot, after 2 months. So what it's been doing, 1 hour every day, the biological brain is in the robot body, and now we will see how it is after 2 months, where it's been learning to turn right when it gets a sensory input. So it receives a sensory pulse from the ultrasonics, and it has learned turn right whenever it gets that. What we see here very quickly, it's quite boring, really. Because it detects the wall and it turns right. Yeah, you know, but it has learned. The important thing is we've been able to witness over the 2 months how the neural pathways have changed that make that happen. And we can affect how those neural pathways change and alter it and look at how does it remember what it's doing, all sorts of questions like that. The other things to say about this, we're now also using a latticed structure which allows us to culture, to grow the brain cells in 3 dimensions, not just 2 dimensions. Now that takes the numbers up to 30 million. Rather than 120,000, we're looking now at 30 million brain cells in a robot body. The other thing to say, it's not just rat brain cells we deal with, it's also human brain cells, which we are able to simply buy in. It's actually easier to deal with human brain cells than it is with rat brain cells. I say easier, it's easier to get hold of them. They are more difficult to use. They're much more delicate, whether we like it or not. The rat brain cells are a lot tougher than the human brain cells. But clearly, if we're looking at trying to understand things like memories, how do memories actually appear in the brain, and if we can deal with things, therefore, like dementia and Alzheimer's, it's much better if we can use human brain cells because it relates much more to that. So the overall system is a robot with a technological body, but a biological brain, which raises questions. You know, is the robot conscious? You know, it probably is, because particularly if it's got human brain cells. And at the moment we have 30 million. Maybe in the future we'll have 100 billion brain cells, the same number of brain cells as you've got and I've got. We can have in a robot. And then we say, is the robot now conscious? Well, why not? You know, it's the same. You know, are you conscious? It raises questions as far as what we are and what we do and how we learn, both from a technical point of view and a philosophical point of view.